Joining me this afternoon, I'm delighted to say, is Harrison Allman-Varty, political commentator. Good afternoon to you, sir. Hello, good afternoon to you, young man.
Good afternoon, David. How are you?
Good grief, what are you wearing this afternoon?
You know, I'm beaming in from my hotel in Portugal. I thought I couldn't let David down.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. Well, I hope you're having a nice holiday, are you?
Yeah, it's nice. It's hot here. Although I've got to say, Faro Airport, avoid at all costs. Terrible. So much for those e-gates. I was slammed in with every man and his dog.
Well, I mean, this is
queuing than flying.
Well, I mean, this is the whole thing, isn't it? That Keir Starmer announced all of these changes, the dynamic alignment, getting back into bed with Europe, and he said, "Oh, by the way, you can use e-gates." Even that wasn't true.
It wasn't even true.
No.
I mean, it was, anyway, I'm not going to relive it because I'm having some sort of, like, flashback moment, and it's gone, it's done. I'm only here for a few days, it's just for the bank holiday.
Well,
and then I'm back.
Well, thanks ever so much for joining us this afternoon. I really am very grateful. Let's talk about Labour, because I've been talking about this over the weekend on my breakfast show, but also just in terms of the way that Labour's popularity is nosediving. Now, the latest story is that Sir Keir Starmer has been warned that announcing U-turns on controversial policies may not be enough to turn around those approval ratings or indeed to win back lost voters. They say last week's climb down on winter fuel payment cuts, as well as this potential reversal on the Tories' two-child benefit cap, run the risk of making him look insecure and could trigger yet more talk of a leadership challenge. Now, this is really interesting because we were just talking there that the Labour Party isn't actually very good at getting rid of its leaders. The Conservative Party, I think, are very good at getting rid of their leaders. We saw that 5 times over the last few years. Now, polling guru Sir John Curtis warned that any policy reversals whatsoever, even if they are deemed popular by the MPs and the public themselves, actually may not be enough to assuage concerns of the members of Parliament. And actually, Keir Starmer starts to look weak. I think there's a bigger problem here. I don't know, actually, what Keir Starmer stands for.
Absolutely. Do you know what I think the worst part about this U-turn is the timing? Like, if you're going to U-turn, like, the outcry was significant when it was first announced, and he's kind of played it too long. So if he was going to turn on this, he should have done it before, because we're actually at a stage now, not where people are okay with it, but the debate has settled to what it was maybe, let's say, 6 months ago. So I think whoever's advised him on that one has dropped a clanger, really. And I do agree. You know, I think John Curtis is a legend. He comes out with some very good points. But I honestly, I think it just makes him look weak. And I think he could have ridden the storm out on this one. I'm not saying that that's the decision to do, but he's gone through the hard bit. And I think personally, it just shows how out of touch he is with it all, in my opinion. And yeah, I think it's just once again Keir Starmer's got foolish people around him telling him do this, do that, and they don't know which way's up.
Well, is it that, or is it actually that Keir Starmer doesn't actually have his own ideology? He doesn't have a belief structure. He doesn't actually know the direction he wants the country to go in.
I think if you sat Keir Starmer down with a bunch of socialists, they'd go, "Oh, look, he's our man." Then if you sat him down with a bunch of raging capitalists, they'd be like, "He's our man." It's quite hard to tell who he is. Now, in fairness to someone like Corbyn, who I don't think there's anything I have in common with Jeremy Corbyn, but he was very clear with what you'd have got. And actually, with clear and concise policies, you actually have quite good leadership on that, because people know what you're going to get, and generally they're on a mission to achieve that. But with Keir Starmer, it's very wishy-washy. I can't tell whether he is quite left-wing or whether he is quite centrist, because he seems to be playing both hands. And the problem is, when you try and appeal to as many people as possible, you end up with the poll rating that he has.
Well, you appeal to no one if you try and appeal to everyone. And that's the point I was trying to get to, which is, what does he really believe in? Just let me ask you, and you're probably the wrong person to ask, because obviously you are party political. What does the future of Britain look like under Keir Starmer?
It's a good one. I think, personally, we haven't actually felt, in my opinion, that much difference between the Conservatives and Labour. And I think it goes back to that same point, is that they're very much a uni-party. They're very much the same. It just shows how, in my opinion, it's not so much Labour, but it just shows how centrist the Conservatives were. When it comes to things like immigration and taxation, there isn't that much difference. So what will we see within the next few years? Probably just more of the same that we've expected these past few years. More disappointment, and just less return for what we're paying into the system. Unfortunately, I hate to be the Grim Reaper, but nothing exciting or good really seems to be on the horizon.
Well, you mentioned Professor Sir John Curtis. I'm delighted to say I'll be talking to him in about 20 minutes' time. So it's
Tell
lucky
him I said hi.
Well, I will. I'm sure he says hi back. Let's talk about free speech, though, because this country prides itself on free speech. But the White House says it's monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly in an escalation of free speech tensions with Keir Starmer. State Department officials are examining the treatment of Connolly. Now, as we know, she's the wife of a Conservative councillor. I mean, this extraordinary prison sentence, 31 months she was jailed for a hurty social media post. Admittedly, not a very clever social media post. She put it up there, terrible words. It was ill-advised. She took it down, and she's been stuck in prison for 31 months. Is that right and fair?
I mean, it's moronic, first of all. She shouldn't have posted that. It's a stupid thing to post. And I don't, to be honest, I do actually accept some of the left-wing arguments on this, where it is obviously she is directly inciting violence on this. However, the response from that, she's obviously acknowledged what she said was wrong. She apologized. She knew actually the consequences of saying stuff like that. And for me, it's a case of, okay, well, let's take what's happened to her and let's put this against other sentences that we've seen these past few years. And we have to make the argument of, is it proportionate? Is this in line with the other very, very serious offences that we've seen? And I think that's the debate here on whether that has been proportionate. A lot of people think it's not been fair at all, hence why the US is potentially looking at getting involved with this.
Well, I think it's very concerning indeed. In fact, Robert Jenrick said this. A domestic abuser with 52 prior offences got off with a suspended sentence. A paedophile who had 110,000 indecent images of children also got away with a suspended sentence. And yet you've got someone who, in the heat of the moment, wrote some very ill-advised comments on social media, deleted them, and ends up in prison for 31 months. It doesn't seem like justice is being done properly.
No, and I think this goes back. I think it's not limited to her case. I think there's lots of instances that we've seen actually since the Labour government have been elected, where we have seen just not fair justice in the sense that you can contrast against other cases that we've seen, and it's not exactly a hard thing to do. Like Jenrick has just outlined there, you don't have to be an investigative to be able to go back and say, well, okay, what about this case? What about this case? And why doesn't that quite line up? So there's definitely some question marks on whether it was political in that sense, and I think a lot of your viewers will think it is, and whether it's actually a fair judgment. And I just think, obviously, look, she shouldn't have said it wasn't wise, and she admits that. And I think the question mark really is what she's got. Fair.
But I think also the government needs to take some of the blame, because it left the public in a vacuum of information. There was nothing forthcoming. And, of course, people were deeply concerned about what was going on the streets of Britain. And you've got people like Suella Braverman now saying that Lucy Connolly is a political prisoner.
I mean, when there was so much hysteria around this, and rightfully so, it was the most horrendous news story. I mean, I think anybody who actually looked into that was not really the same person after reading some of those details. But I don't know why the government wouldn't hit us with the facts when there is such conspiracies flying around. Surely the natural position is, okay, we're going to quash this. Here are the facts. Because there were lots of this and that online. And with that, people obviously build on that. And Chinese whispers, it gets worse. And I think the ultimate way they've done that is maybe approach their public service broadcaster, the BBC, to done its job and actually inform people of what happened.
And, of course, just looking back, these riots broke out because of misinformation, also because the authorities blankly refused, actually, to name the suspect, discuss any of his background. If you recall, the public were told there was no terror-related incident. And, of course, that fueled the conspiracy theories. And so it was that vacuum of information and the government not taking control of the situation that I think actually made this much worse.
Absolutely, and I think the government have a responsibility. They're not stupid. Well, I don't think they would have been able to see online what's been going on. It was probably one of the most intense moments that we've seen on social media. How it was updating daily, not even daily, just every moment. They should have taken control of that, and they didn't. And I think that they are definitely to blame.
Later on this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about this other article that was in the Telegraph today, saying half of white men are very worried about what they say in public in terms of free speech. Are you worried about what you say in free speech? Or have I lost you?
Well, no. Sorry, I'm back. I think I think we're getting better. I think we're past peak woke. To be honest though, like there are consequences to saying stuff. Like I remember I had a friend who worked for a very corporate company, and he was sat amongst the call, and they were talking about X, Y, Z, and he didn't agree with any of it at all. And he said, "Okay, I've got two options presented in front of me now. I can either stay silent and have my life as normal, where I get paid and I still have my job, or I can speak up." And I maybe feel a bit better about myself, but now I'm going to be think lesser of my employer, and I potentially have the risk of getting the sack. So that's how woke has been so successful, is in the sense that it's ingrained itself amongst these big corporations, where people just feel, actually, all right, fine, yeah, I don't agree with that, but it's probably best for me to keep quiet because why would I want to rock the boat?
Yeah, I think it's really worrying, actually. I think we should be able to freely discuss ideas and our worries and our thoughts, and even if they're prejudicial thoughts, at least they can be countered. If you then push it underground, that's when real problems arise.
And I don't know about you, I quite like being surrounded by people who do have different opinions to me. When you're constantly amongst people who have very similar opinions, it's really boring. And hearing the same variation of your thoughts, it can almost be annoying.
Well, that's very interesting, actually. Isn't it the case, though, that we surround ourselves with people who are the echo chamber of ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I quite like being around people who are, let's say, a socialist. I don't agree with them, but I want to understand what they think of a certain topic. I want to understand why they've reached that conclusion, because if I'm with someone who agrees, yes, no, we should have tax cuts on X, Y, Z, we're just going to bounce it off each other. And we go, yeah, I know that, well, I know that as well. And then it's conversation into that.
Just very quickly before the break, the King and the Queen are travelling to Canada. In fact, they'll arrive in Canada later today for this two-day visit. Now, this is a very difficult tightrope for the King and Queen to walk here because, of course, Donald Trump says, right, Canada's going to be the 51st state of the United States. Now, hang on a minute. Canada not happy. Trudeau not happy about this. Canada, part of the Commonwealth. The
King... Yeah, I think you should
sorry,
say.
Carney. The King, head of the Commonwealth, obviously he has to defend those Commonwealth interests, but at the same time he's being dispatched by Starmer to try to sort of smooth over the edges with the US and to make sure we have a very good relationship with the US.
To be honest, I don't really think the King can put a foot wrong with Trump. I think Trump's so in awe of the royal family and tradition that even if he doesn't agree necessarily with what Charles is saying, he'll probably nod and say and slap his back and say, yeah, right on. So I won't worry too much about it. And I think Trump knows how this works. The King really doesn't get involved that much with the politics. He's more of a figurehead of it. I think it'll be all right. I think it's just fishing for news story that isn't actually there. It is a little bit awkward, obviously, with comments made, but I think since Carney's been in the White House, things have calmed down.
I mean, I think it's quite significant. The King is going to read this speech from the throne to Canada's Parliament tomorrow. This is the first time a monarch has actually delivered this for 50 years. He's following in the footsteps of his mother, who did it in 57 and 77 as well. I think it is an historic moment.
Yeah, look, sure, I'm happy to be proved wrong, but I don't think there'll be any kind of big announcement that's going to come from it. I don't think there's going to be anything big, pivotal story from this. I think this is what the King does best. He's very good at being diplomatic and going over and representing Britain on the world stage and being friends with as many people as he can to make sure that things are all right for the proper gritty negotiations to go ahead later on.
And I think we're going to see tons of pomp and circumstance and ceremony as well in that visit. Harrison, thanks ever so much for the moment.